Hi, my name is Gary Santo, CEO of RX Green Technologies, and welcome to our production facility. I thought it would be a good idea to walk you through how we manufacture our Coco Coir products, as we do approach things a little differently here at RX Green than most other cocoa manufacturers. I came to the company a little more than a year ago, having spent a significant amount of time running commercial grows in the cannabis space. So from my perspective, the goal was to turn this company into something that was just a pure vendor, into more of an operator focus. So managed by operators, designed by operators, for operators, because I understood firsthand all of the different pain points that a number of operators experience. I know what it was like to purchase product. I know the frustration of supply chain, the frustration of inconsistency of product. And we've really built a team and a company over the last year and change focused on trying to solve all of those so that we're a trusted partner and not just another vendor that sits in a Rolodex somewhere. So with that, let's talk a little bit about what we do that's different. First and foremost, it starts with the quality of the cocoa. We went through a number of vendors over the course of this company's history. We've been around since 2011 and have had any number of vendors. And what we noticed was wild inconsistencies. Even though most of the Coco Coir comes from the same region and different manufacturers in that region, the inconsistency in the EC levels, the pH levels, the heavy metal levels, even just the macronutrients, any of the pesticides, you name it, everything was different. And when it came to compression and how those blocks would expand when you would receive them into your facility, there was wild variation there, even within the same vendor. You would get one pallet that expanded to a certain level, another pallet in the same lot that would expand to a totally different level, even though it was the same height and the same weight when it started. So as frustrating as that was, we learned a lot, and we started to develop our own SOPs and then ultimately our own recipe that we went out to various manufacturers and requested that they hit. And we're lucky enough to have a few different manufacturers that we work with now who are able to meet those standards. The compression level, the nutrient panel, the microbial panel testing, EC, pH, heavy metal, all the usual tests have to be performed on site before anything is shipped to us from overseas. And then when it arrives, it has to be wrapped a certain way, shipped a certain way, and we're going to perform all of the same tests to make sure that the product that we've contracted for is the product we receive. And the thinking there is, we start with a clean, homogeneous product, we're going to have a clean, homogeneous product at the end. So you take a look, and this is what our raw cocoa pellets come in as. Even just what they're wrapped with. This black wrapping is not something we used to get. It used to be typically just as clear plastic. How many times it's wrapped, the level it's wrapped, is it wrapped underneath or not? All of these things matter with how the cocoa transports, and then ultimately how the cocoa flows through our manufacturing system. If it's wrapped incorrectly, it's real easy for pieces of that wrap to end up in the shredding process and end up as foreign matter, which is the last thing you want as an operator. So these come in out of containers, we land them, we immediately tear open a piece and we take a sample and we test that sample, again, for EC, heavy metals, pH, full nutrient panel, full microbial panel, and we make sure it meets the specs. Once we know it meets the specs, we then begin our manufacturing process. Now, one thing to note is no two pallets of Coco Coir in this format are the same. There are different variances, and while we do have a quality commitment that sets a certain range, what we try to do is have as homogeneous a run as possible. So we will look at all of the pallets and see how they all tested, and we will mix and match to make sure that we pick the most similar amounts of EC and pH and so on down the line. So it's a little bit of a recipe that we have to go through every single production run, and we have 4 production runs a day. So you can imagine there's a fair amount of recipe management that needs to go on. Once we decide which pallets and which lots and which bricks we're going to use, we then start a pre-hydration process. And one thing to note is everything that we hydrate with is using RO water, cleanest possible water. Now, RO systems you can put in place and you can sort of forget about. How frequently are you changing the filters? How often are they being tested? But we're testing that water on a regular basis. We're changing those filters constantly because we know how much water can really impact what happens with this cocoa once you hydrate it and start to activate all the microbials that are inherent to Coco Coir. Once we go through the pre-hydration process, everything comes over to our initial shredder. So the pallets themselves are unwrapped. As I said, they're moistened, they're tipped over. You can see some of the blocks already in that shredder. They will load up through, they will hit those tines, and that is the first of the shredding that will occur. Certainly not the last. You'll see throughout the rest of this line, we have other hydration spots and additional shredding spots because it does take some time for the compression to start to fully expand and reach its full potential. And our goal throughout this process is to maintain a steady hydration level so that you don't have an issue at any point all the way through to the end state. That's not the end of the shredding process, however. That's just the start. Because as you can imagine, these blocks have to expand and it takes some time. We come over to this part of the line. Here we have 3 hydration points that we manage. You can turn them up, turn them down, or not use them at all, depending. And this will all factor into the recipe that we're using that day. So again, we factor in the cocoa itself, how compressed it is, how dense it is, what kind of water we need. We have to look at the temperature, not only in the warehouse, but outside. Summers here in Colorado can be exceptionally dry and hot. We have to use different hydration levels. So there we can dial it up or dial it down as we need to. And we have our quality control team that is constantly taking samples throughout the production cycle each day to make sure that the hydration levels are where we want to have them. As it continues on, there's another shredder that sits right over here. These tines will rotate like a corkscrew and push the product through. So now at this point, you're trying to get equal hydration all the way through. And really, this is where some of the magic starts to happen. If you overhydrate in the front end, you're mixing mud. If you don't hydrate enough, you have clumpy product coming through. So that constant balance of making sure the hydration and the breakdown of the compressed blocks happens as equally as possible is where all of this happens. It then feeds up this conveyor belt, and we'll go to these 2 hoppers. And these hoppers basically can also add hydration if need be. We can have the product sit overnight, so if it's a particularly dense product, we might choose to shred it, hydrate it, and put it in the hopper overnight, and then start the production run the next morning. We found that can also be very helpful in terms of reducing clumping and making sure that the cocoa is as malleable as possible. Once the raw cocoa sits in these hoppers, whether it sits overnight because it requires additional hydration or not, the next step is to custom blend to our customers' demands. Now we have cocoa available in a variety of formats, whether it's 2 cubic foot bags, 1 gallon and 2 gallon ready to use, pre-hydrated cocoa bags, and so on. But it can also come in forms pure cocoa, it could be mixed with perlite, which helps with drainage, and even those mixture levels can be various depending on the customer's needs. Typically 70-30 is sort of the industry standard, 70% cocoa, 30% perlite, but we do have some customers that use 80-20, 90-10, and even one customer that uses the 50-50 split. So whatever your blend is, we can manufacture that, we can dial it in with our computerized settings and go through the process, which really starts here with the perlite hopper. At this point, the pure cocoa is coming out, it goes through that conveyor belt, and at that point the perlite is added. One thing to note about our perlite is much like the same pain that we go through on making sure we get the cleanest, purest cocoa, we do the same with perlite. We've noticed that quality does matter. The lesser cost perlite sometimes comes with higher chunks, more dust, isn't as user-friendly in terms of how you mix it, and does it mix well throughout the bag, or does it tend to mix in clumps? And that's something that we take very seriously, because I know firsthand how many times we would tear a bag open and you would see a perlite mix where there's a lot of perlite at the bottom of the bag and not a lot at the top. So here we have perlite mixture that then has to go through a similar agitation process. So we have more hydration spots here. Again, as you add perlite, that takes some of the moisture out, so we have to continuously hydrate the product. But then we have those mixers up top, we call them the pizza cutters, that then make sure that the perlite is evenly blended throughout. So when you open up an R Extreme bag of a perlite mix, you will notice even consistency from the top of the bag, to the middle of the bag, to the bottom of the bag, no matter what size or format you happen to get it. So again, trying to make sure that when you get that product, it is as consistent as possible, so you don't have to deal with having to alter your processes every step of the way. The QC team continues to look at hydration levels, pH levels, EC levels throughout this entire process. Again, we have very specific standards that can change from season to season and run to run. But ultimately, we continue to manage it throughout this process until we get to the final stage right before bags. This glass hopper is where the final hydration occurs. We can still take some last samples there to make sure everything is the right moisture level. And then it goes to the final conveyor belt that then feeds the piece that makes us so cost effective, our auto bagger. All of our bags are made from film, and they're made to custom size. So whether it's a 2 cubic foot, a 1 gallon, or 2 gallon, it comes on a roll that then this machine is able to manipulate, slice, open, seal, and design to our specification. And that's what this machine is doing right now. We're running right now some 1 gallon, ready to use pre-hydrated cell bags. You can see they come through on a film level. They come through our conveyor belt here as they approach the funnel where all the cocoa comes in there. And then each bag drops out, is sealed,
and going through sort of a repacking and a flatness, we can allow spinning at the end to better stack the pallets. That's another piece that we take very seriously, and that is, how does the cocoa get to you? What condition is it in? A lot of times people try to fit as much cocoa on the pallet as possible, not thinking about what happens when that goes on truck, what happens when a forklift leaves, and what happens at the very end. So add little things, whether it's scaloids, other different pieces to that mix on the smaller bags such as this, allow that pallet to be very clean. And here you see some of our finished products. These again are our 1 gallon grow bags. If you tried to stack these all on their own, they fall all over the place, they get damaged. So here, we use various levels. Costs a little bit more, but we find that it's a better product as a result, and we're able to absorb those costs because of the manufacturing efficiencies that we have. This is how we finish out the product. Now our QC team, before it gets to this final packaging stage, will take random bags off the line. They will inspect the bags visually. So for the grow bags, they're going to make sure the micro perforations in the drain holes are in the right spot, that the bag seals properly. For the big 2 cubic foot bag, similarly, they're going to check the gussets, they're going to check the seal. But then they will tear open the bags, and again, they'll perform EC testing. They'll perform pH testing. They'll even look at the micronutrients as well. They generally don't run another complete microbial panel, because when you do hydrate and activate any type of a Coco Coir product, you are starting that microbial process. But we do a fair amount of testing at that very end. And then ultimately they'll look also at the volume. You want to know that when you open up a 1 or 2 gallon bag, it's 1 or 2 gallons. And there might be a little bit of variation, but you're not getting a 3/4 full bag or a half full bag. Or for that matter, a 2 full bag that falls over the right place. So these are all the steps that we put in place that frankly separate us from being a pure manufacturer's vendor to more of an operator-focused shop. And the feedback we've been receiving really supports that. You know, we see that people open up the bags, they appreciate the quality of the cocoa, the consistency, the thoughtfulness, and how things are stacked and produced. So that is the RX3 difference, and the fact that we have this amazing piece of equipment and a phenomenal team that knows how to work it and get the most efficiency out of it allows us to deliver some of the highest quality cocoa and some of the best prices available in the market.